Nolan Cassidy stood at the edge of what should have been impossible. 100-acre ranch sold for exactly $1. The weathered wooden fence stretched endlessly under the harsh afternoon sun, and the main house sat like a forgotten prayer in the distance. But when he pushed open that creaking front door 3 hours later, he discovered the deal came with something the seller had forgotten to mention. Someone was already living there. The sound hit him first. Soft footsteps upstairs, deliberate and careful, like someone trying not to be heard. Nolan froze in the doorway, his hand still gripping the brass handle. The house was supposed to be empty. Boone Carter had sworn on it when they shook hands at the land office. "Nobody's been in that place for years," the man had said, his eyes darting away. "You'll have it all to yourself." Yet there she was. A young woman appeared at the top of the wooden staircase, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. She didn't scream or run. Instead, she looked down at him with the strangest expression. Not fear, but something closer to resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment for a long time. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I'm Iris Quaid. I've been taking care of this place." Nolan's mind raced. Taking care of it? For who? And why hadn't Carter mentioned her? He studied her face, searching for deception, but found only a quiet strength that reminded him of his own mother during the hardest times. "The seller didn't say anything about anyone living here," he managed. Iris descended the stairs slowly, each step measured and graceful. "Boone Carter doesn't know everything about this ranch," she replied. "There are things about this land that go deeper than what's written on any deed." She moved to the window and pulled back the faded curtain, revealing the vast expanse of grassland beyond. "I've been here for 3 years. This place saved my life when I had nowhere else to go. I've kept the roof patched, the well clean, and the fences mended. I suppose you could say we've been taking care of each other." Nolan felt his carefully planned future shifting beneath his feet. He'd saved every penny for 5 years to buy his own land, to build something that belonged to him. This ranch, even abandoned and run down, represented everything he'd dreamed of. But now, standing in this dusty room with this unexpected woman, he realized his $1 purchase had brought him something far more complicated than property. "Why did Carter sell it so cheap?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would change everything. Iris turned from the window, and for the first time, he saw fear flicker across her features. "Because," she said quietly, "he's not the only one who knows I'm here. And the others, they're not coming to make deals." Nolan set his worn leather satchel on the wooden table, his mind spinning with questions that demanded answers. The afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows cast long shadows across Iris's face, and he could see the weight of secrets pressing down on her shoulders. "Who's coming for you?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite the growing tension in his chest. Iris moved away from the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Men who believe I took something that belongs to them," she said. "Something valuable enough that they've been hunting me for 3 years. Did you take it?" She met his eyes directly, and he saw no deception there. "I took something, yes, but it belonged to me long before they ever laid claim to it." Her voice carried a pain that spoke of old wounds. "My father's gold claim. He died in a mining accident, and these men showed up with forged papers saying he owed them everything. They took our house, our land, everything we had." Nolan studied her face, recognizing the look of someone who'd been pushed beyond their breaking point. He'd seen it in his own mirror during the worst years after his wife died. "So you took back what was yours?" "I took the original deed and the survey maps proving our claim was legitimate," Iris said. "Documents that would destroy their operation if they ever saw the inside of a courthouse." She laughed bitterly. "But getting to a courthouse alive is the challenge." The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made them both freeze. Iris rushed to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. Nolan joined her, and together they watched 3 riders approaching along the main trail, still too far away to make out clearly, but close enough to know they meant business. "Is that them?" Nolan whispered. Iris shook her head. "No, but—" She paused, studying the riders more carefully. "That's strange. Those horses are moving too fast for casual travelers, but too slow for urgency, like they're searching for something." Nolan felt his stomach tighten. He'd bought this ranch to escape complications, to build a simple life on his own terms. But watching those distant figures approach, he realized his $1 investment had pulled him into something far more dangerous than he'd bargained for. "I should go." Iris said suddenly, turning from the window. "I've already brought too much trouble to this place. You don't deserve to get caught up in my problems." "Where would you go?" Nolan asked, though he wasn't sure why he cared. 3 hours ago, he'd never known she existed. She hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, he saw the truth. She had nowhere left to run. The riders were getting closer, their intentions unknown but their presence undeniably threatening. "How long before the dangerous ones find you here?" he asked. Iris looked back toward the approaching riders, then met his gaze. "If those men down there are who I think they are," she said quietly, "they already have." The riders drew closer, and Nolan could make out their faces now. Hard men with the kind of weathered features that came from years of taking what they wanted. They reined in their horses about 50 yards from the house, close enough to be a threat, but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. "That's Wade Harper," Iris whispered, her voice tight with recognition. "He works for the Maddox brothers. If he's here, it means they've finally tracked me down." Nolan watched as the 3 men spread out in a loose semicircle, effectively blocking the main escape routes from the property. Their movements were practiced, coordinated. These weren't random drifters. They were hunters who'd found their prey. "What exactly did you take from them?" he asked, needing to understand what he was stepping into. Iris moved away from the window and knelt beside a loose floorboard near the fireplace. With quick, efficient movements, she pried it up and reached into the hidden space beneath. When she stood, she held a leather pouch and a rolled bundle of papers. "The deed to the richest gold claim in the territory," she said, unrolling one of the documents, "and the survey maps showing exactly where the ore runs deepest. My father spent 10 years mapping every vein, every pocket of gold in those hills. The Maddox brothers killed him for it, then discovered he'd hidden the real documents." Nolan studied the intricate drawings on the map, noting the careful notations and detailed measurements. This wasn't just a claim. It was a treasure map, drawn by someone who knew every inch of the land. "This is worth a fortune. Enough to buy half the territory," Iris confirmed, "and enough to make them hunt me across 3 states. A sharp whistle from outside made them both turn toward the window. Wade Harper had dismounted and was walking slowly toward the house, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. His companions remained mounted, watching the surrounding area for any signs of movement. "Iris Quaid," Harper called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "We know you're in there. Time to settle this like civilized people." Nolan felt his pulse quicken. 3 years of carpentry work had given him strong hands and a steady nerve, but he'd never faced men like these. Still, looking at Iris's pale face, he realized he couldn't just hand her over to them. "There's a back way out," she whispered urgently. "Through the kitchen and down to the creek. You could slip away while they're focused on the front of the house." "What about you?" She smiled sadly. "I'm tired of running. Maybe it's time to face them." Nolan stared at her, recognizing the resignation in her voice. She was giving up, ready to sacrifice herself so he could escape the mess his $1 purchase had created. But as Harper's footsteps approached the front porch, echoing like a countdown, Nolan made a decision that surprised even him. "No," he said firmly, moving to the window. "This is my property now, and I don't recall inviting anyone onto it." Harper stopped at the base of the porch steps, looking up at the house with a cold smile that promised violence. Nolan stepped onto the front porch, making sure Harper could see him clearly. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the weathered boards, and he kept his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "This is private property," he called out. "You and your friends need to move along." Harper's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Well now, looks like the little lady found herself a protector." He took another step closer, his spurs jangling with each movement. "Thing is, friend, we're not here for trouble with you. Just need to have a conversation with Miss Quaid about some property that belongs to our employer." "I don't see any legal papers," Nolan replied, noting how Harper's companions had positioned themselves to cover all angles of approach. "Far as I know, anything on this ranch belongs to me now." Harper chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "Legal papers? That's funny." He gestured toward the house. "See, the way we figure it, Miss Quaid has been squatting on this land for years, probably going through anything of value left behind by the previous owners. Wouldn't be surprised if she found some items that need to be returned to their rightful owners." Inside the house, Nolan could hear Iris moving quietly, hopefully hiding the documents somewhere safer. He needed to buy her time. But Harper was clearly growing impatient with the conversation. "Tell you what," Harper continued, his hand now resting openly on his gun handle. "Why don't you call her out here so we can all discuss this like reasonable folks? No need for anyone to get hurt over a simple misunderstanding." Nolan felt sweat gathering at the base of his neck despite the cooling afternoon air. 3 against 1 weren't odds any sensible man would take, especially when he wasn't even sure what he was fighting for. But looking at Harper's cold eyes, he realized this wasn't about justice or legal claims. These men would take what they wanted regardless of who got hurt in the process. "She's not here," he lied, hoping his voice sounded more convincing than it felt. Harper's expression darkened. "Now that's interesting, because my associate over there with the sharp eyes swears he saw 2 figures in that window not 5 minutes ago." He pointed toward one of the mounted men. "Johnny's got a talent for noticing details others might miss." The man called Johnny tipped his hat mockingly, his rifle resting casually across his saddle but positioned for quick use. "Maybe you saw shadows," Nolan suggested. "Old houses play tricks with the light." "Maybe," Harper agreed, though his tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. "Or maybe you're protecting someone who's caused my employers considerable financial loss. That kind of loyalty to a stranger might make a man wonder about your own involvement in the situation." The threat was clear now. Harper was suggesting that Nolan himself might be complicit in whatever theft they were pursuing. It was a clever move. Give him a way out by abandoning Iris or face the consequences of standing with her. Through the window behind him, Nolan heard the softest creak of floorboards. Iris was still moving around inside, and Harper's sharp-eyed companion would notice any sound that carried. "Time's running short," Harper said, pulling out a pocket watch and making a show of checking it. "My patience tends to wear thin when folks aren't being honest with me." The silence stretched between them like a taut rope ready to snap. Nolan could feel Harper studying his face, searching for cracks in his resolve. Behind him, the house had gone completely quiet. Too quiet. Either Iris had found the perfect hiding spot, or she was preparing for something desperate. "You know what I think?" Harper said, closing his pocket watch with a sharp click. "I think you bought this place knowing exactly what you'd find here. Maybe Miss Quaid promised you a share of what she stole if you helped her stay hidden." "You think wrong," Nolan replied, though he had to admit the accusation sounded plausible. "I bought this ranch fair and square this morning. First time I've ever set foot on this property." Harper exchanged glances with his mounted companions, some silent communication passing between them. The man called Johnny shifted in his saddle, and Nolan caught the subtle movement of his hand toward his rifle. "Here's what's going to happen," Harper announced, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You're going to step aside, and we're going to search this house. When we find what we're looking for, we'll be on our way. Resist, and you'll be buried on your own property before sunset." Nolan's mouth went dry, but he held his ground. "And if I refuse?" Harper's smile returned, colder than before. "Then we'll search it anyway, and you won't be around to complain about the mess we make." The front door opened behind Nolan with a soft creak, and he felt his heart stop. Iris stepped out onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly despite the obvious fear in her eyes. She'd changed into riding clothes and had a small pack slung over her shoulder. "Enough," she said firmly. "This man has nothing to do with our business, Harper. Let's settle this between us." Harper's expression shifted to one of satisfaction, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. "There's the sensible approach. Step down here, Miss Quaid, and we can discuss terms." "The terms are simple," Iris replied, staying close to Nolan's side. "You let him go, and I'll come with you willingly. No violence, no threats. Just me for his safety." Nolan turned to stare at her. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she cut him off softly. "You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect." Harper clapped his hands together once, the sound sharp in the afternoon air. "See how easy that was? Now, about those documents you took." "What documents?" Iris asked, her voice steady. "The ones that prove our employer's legitimate claim to the Quaid mine," Harper said patiently. "The papers your father hid before his unfortunate accident." "My father died in a cave-in caused by your employer's unsafe mining practices," Iris shot back. There were no documents to hide. Harper's facade of civility began to crack. "Don't play games with me, girl. We know you have them, and we know they're here. The only question is whether we tear this place apart board by board to find them." Iris met his gaze steadily, but Nolan could see her hands trembling slightly. Whatever documents she'd shown him were her only leverage, and she was about to lose them. That's when the sound of more approaching riders echoed across the valley. Coming fast from the eastern trail, Harper spun toward the sound of approaching hoofbeats, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. The new riders were still distant, but they were coming hard and fast, dust rising in their wake like a brown cloud against the horizon. "Johnny!" Harper barked to his sharp-eyed companion. "How many?" The man squinted into the distance, shading his eyes with one hand. "4 riders, maybe 5. Can't make out who they are from here, but they're pushing their horses hard." Harper's jaw tightened. Could be trouble. He turned back to Iris, his earlier patience completely gone. "Change of plans. We're taking you and those documents now, before whoever that is decides to complicate things." "I told you I don't have any documents," Iris insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Search the house," Harper ordered his men. "Tear it apart if you have to." Nolan stepped forward, blocking the porch steps. "You're not going anywhere near my house." Harper's gun cleared its holster so fast Nolan barely saw the movement. The cold metal pressed against his forehead, and he could smell the gun oil and leather from Harper's gloves. "Last chance to be smart about this," Harper growled. "Stand aside or I'll put you down right here." The approaching riders were closer now, close enough that their individual horses could be distinguished. Nolan could see they were riding in formation, disciplined and purposeful, not random travelers, but men with a mission. "Wade Harper!" The shout came from the lead rider, still 200 yards away but closing fast. "Step away from those people." Harper's eyes widened in recognition, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Nolan saw genuine concern cross his features. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. "Friends of yours?" Iris asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Sheriff Bennett?" Harper replied through gritted teeth. "Someone must have sent word ahead." He glanced back at his companions, who were looking increasingly nervous about their exposed position. The riders thundered closer, and Nolan could now make out the distinctive glint of badge metal on the lead rider's vest. A sheriff and his deputies, riding like they meant business. But Harper's gun was still pressed against Nolan's skull, and his finger was tight on the trigger. "This complicates things," Harper said, more to himself than anyone else. "But it doesn't change what needs to happen here." Sheriff Bennett and his men were within shouting distance now, their horses lathered with sweat from the hard ride. The sheriff was a lean man with gray whiskers and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years dealing with situations exactly like this one. "Drop your weapons," Bennett called out, as his group fanned out in a semicircle around Harper's men. "Nobody needs to die today." Harper pressed the gun harder against Nolan's forehead. "Maybe nobody needs to die," he called back. "But that depends on whether you're willing to let justice take its course." "Sheriff? Justice?" Bennett laughed harshly. "Is that what you call hunting down an innocent woman across 3 territories? Harper's face darkened. "That woman is a thief who's been harboring stolen property. We're here on behalf of legitimate business interests to recover what belongs to them." "The Maddox brothers' business interests," Sheriff Bennett corrected, his voice dripping with disgust. "I've seen enough of their version of justice to know what it looks like." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harper's men were outnumbered now, but they still held the advantage of having hostages. Nolan could feel sweat trickling down his back as he tried to remain perfectly still with the gun barrel pressed against his skin. "Here's what's going to happen," Harper announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "Miss Quaid and I are going to have a private conversation about those documents. Anyone who interferes will watch this brave property owner pay the price." Sheriff Bennett held up one hand, signaling his deputies to hold their positions. The standoff stretched taut like a wire about to snap, everyone waiting for someone else to make the first move that would determine who lived and who died. "Harper," the sheriff said carefully, "you're making a mistake here. The Maddox brothers don't own this territory, and they sure don't own me." "Maybe not," Harper replied, never taking his eyes off Bennett while keeping the gun pressed firmly against Nolan's head. "But they own enough judges and politicians to make your life very difficult if you interfere with legitimate business." Iris stepped forward slightly, drawing Harper's attention. "Stop this," she said firmly. "You want the documents? Fine. They're hidden under the loose floorboard by the fireplace wrapped in oiled cloth." Nolan felt his heart sink. She was giving up the only leverage she had, throwing away 3 years of careful hiding to save a man she'd met hours ago. Harper's eyes lit up with triumph, but he didn't lower his weapon. "Johnny, get in there and find them. And be careful. Miss Quaid has proven herself quite creative when it comes to hiding things." The sharp-eyed rider dismounted, and moved toward the porch, but Sheriff Bennett's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Hey, Johnny," Bennett called out. "See, I've got a warrant here for Wade Harper's arrest on charges of murder, robbery, and conspiracy. Anyone who helps him is looking at being an accessory after the fact." Johnny froze on the bottom step, looking back at Harper uncertainly. "You didn't say nothing about murder charges." "Wade, shut up and get those papers," Harper snarled, but Nolan could hear the edge of panic creeping into his voice. "The murder of Thomas Quaid," Sheriff Bennett continued, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Iris's father. Seems we found a witness who saw you and the Maddox brothers rig that mine cave-in. Man's been hiding in fear for 3 years, but he finally decided to come forward." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Iris gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Someone saw what happened to my father?" "Old Pete Harden," Bennett confirmed. "He was working a claim upstream when he saw Harper and 2 other men tampering with the support beams in your father's mine. Says they knew exactly when Thomas would be going down for his afternoon check." Harper's face had gone pale, but his grip on the gun remained steady. "That drunk's testimony won't hold up in any court." "Maybe not," Bennett agreed. "But combined with those documents Miss Quaid has been protecting, the ones that prove her father's legitimate claim to the mine, it's enough to hang all 3 of you." Nolan felt the gun barrel tremble slightly against his skin. Harper was realizing that killing witnesses wasn't going to solve his problem anymore, not with a sheriff and 4 deputies watching every move. "Johnny," Harper barked, "I said get those papers." But Johnny was already backing away from the porch, his hands raised peacefully. "Sorry, Wade, but I didn't sign up for a hanging offense. I'm done." The third rider, a younger man who'd been silent until now, suddenly spurred his horse and bolted toward the tree line, apparently deciding that retreat was the better part of valor. Harper found himself suddenly alone, outnumbered, and facing charges that would see him dancing at the end of a rope. His breathing became rapid and shallow, the kind of panic that made desperate men do dangerous things. "This isn't over," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Then, louder, "Even if you take me in, the Maddox brothers will never stop hunting her. Those documents are worth too much." "Maybe," Sheriff Bennett said, slowly dismounting and taking a step closer. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is you putting down that gun before someone gets hurt." Harper's hand began to shake visibly, and Nolan realized with growing horror that the man was about to make a choice that would get them all killed. Harper's desperation reached its breaking point. With a wild snarl, he shoved Nolan away and swung his gun toward Sheriff Bennett, but the sudden movement threw off his balance. Nolan stumbled but managed to dive sideways off the porch as the first shot rang out. Bennett's deputies moved with practiced precision. 2 shots answered Harper's wild fire, and the outlaw crumpled to the ground, his weapon spinning uselessly in the dirt. The entire confrontation was over in seconds, leaving only the echo of gunfire and the smell of powder smoke hanging in the afternoon air. "Is everyone all right?" Bennett called out, keeping his weapon trained on Harper's motionless form. Nolan picked himself up from behind a wooden crate, checking for injuries and finding only bruised ribs. Iris rushed down from the porch, her face pale but determined. "I'm fine," she said, then looked down at Harper. "Is he dead?" one of the deputies confirmed after checking for a pulse. Caught him square in the chest. Sheriff Bennett holstered his weapon and turned to Iris with the expression of genuine sympathy. "Miss Quaid, I'm sorry it took so long to get justice for your father. If you're willing to testify about those documents and what happened to your family, we can finally put the Maddox brothers where they belong." Iris nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I've been waiting 3 years to tell someone who would listen. The documents are in the house," she continued, glancing at Nolan. "Everything my father recorded about the mine, including proof that the Maddox brothers forged the papers claiming ownership." 2 hours later, after statements had been given and evidence collected, Sheriff Bennett and his men rode away with Harper's body and a promise to return within the week to escort Iris to the territorial courthouse. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Nolan and Iris stood on the porch, watching the dust settle from the departing riders. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with secrets and threats. "So," Nolan said finally, "I suppose you'll be leaving once this is all settled." Iris turned to look at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Where would I go? I've been taking care of this place for 3 years. Seems like a waste to abandon it now." "It's my ranch now," he pointed out. though there was no challenge in his voice. True, she agreed, but you bought it for $1, and it came with someone to help run it. Besides, she gestured toward the rolling grassland beyond the house. This place is big enough for 2 people who don't mind working hard. Nolan considered this, thinking about the lonely years he'd spent saving for his own land, dreaming of building something that would last. He'd imagined doing it alone, but standing here with Iris, watching the last light fade over their shared horizon, he realized some things were better built together. Partners? He asked, extending his hand. Partners,